just a family quarrel, I believe. But that was years ago. You don't know what it was about? I haven't an idea. I've always thought it was because when Mr. Talbot died, Mrs. Lancaster's first husband, his will didn't provide for Miss Lydia, who was his sister, and Mrs. Lancaster left her to Mrs. John Talbot to look after. But it may not have been that at all. Probably was, he agreed. The more money people have, the more care they take of it. That's why they have it. Well, we've got to the son there, George. How does he manage with all this locking up? It isn't a normal life for a young man. You'll grant that. He's never known anything else. Of course he realizes it's unusual, but he is really fond of his mother. He dodges some of it by living his own life outside. That's only natural. What do you mean by his own life? Tennis, golf, clubs. And women? I don't believe so. I've never heard anything of that sort. But then, of course, I wouldn't. It was nearly 10 o'clock when he left, leaving me rather exhausted. I went to bed shortly afterwards, and I was sleeping soundly when between 12 and 1 o'clock that same night a motorist on the North Road found the body of Holmes lying on the cement a dozen or so miles out of town. Chapter 32. Although when he abandoned Mother and Aunt Caroline he had worn a smart uniform, when found he was dressed in shabby clothes, and a cap which was badly worn lay a foot or two away. Apparently he had been struck by a hit-and-run driver, and with the feeling that he might be still alive the motorist brought him in, with his horn blowing like a police siren, to the General Hospital not far from us on Liberty Avenue. The hospital, finding nothing on him to identify him and having discovered without any peculiar emotion that he was dead, then sent him downtown to the morgue. And it was at the morgue the next morning that Detective Sullivan of the Homicide Squad, taking what he called a general look-see after what looked like a double suicide but might be murder, saw him and found his face familiar. I've seen him somewhere, he said. Seen him lately, too. He walked away, intent on his other problem, but Holmes bothered him. He has, I believe, a reputation in the force for a tenacious memory, and at last it came to him. He had queried this man on the Lancaster case, along with the other servants. He shot back to the table and looked the body over carefully. There was no real indication that the man had been murdered, although there was a rather bad contusion on the back of his head. It looked like another hit-and-run case, but he knew that our car had been missing the afternoon before and found abandoned later, although not on the North Road. In almost the opposite direction, in fact. It did not fit. "Let's see this fellow's uniform," he said at last. "There's something not just right about this. Get his clothes, somebody." Somebody did, laying them out on a white table, and Sullivan surveyed them with some surprise. "Sure these are his? Last time he was seen he was in full uniform with breeches and puttees, and driving a limousine." "Seems to have lost the lot, then," said the attendant, including the car. "Those are his, all right." Mr. Sullivan looked over the layout. There were no papers. There was a $5 bill and some small change, and a very soiled handkerchief. For the rest, a suit of summer underwear, a new shirt, old and worn overall pants and a coat, a nondescript belt, the battered cap and worn shoes and socks. There was not a mark on anything that could identify him, but there was one thing that was peculiar. His left-hand pocket was filled with keys, small keys of almost every sort and description. There were about 24 of them. "Looks like a housebreaker," said the attendant. But I believe Mr. Sullivan made no comment. He was examining the shirt carefully, a new white shirt of an inexpensive type. Had his coat on when he was brought in, did he? "Yes, Mr. Sullivan. I took it off myself." Sullivan was no talker. He gathered up the shirt, being careful not to smear certain marks on it, and carried it away under his arm. Then, having pocketed that vast array of keys and with a parting glance at the quiet figure on the slab, he simply walked out again. It was 11 o'clock on that Thursday morning when he rang our doorbell. I was in the lower hall arranging the flowers, it being one of our traditions that a gentlewoman attends to the house flowers in the morning, and that the daughters of the house are particularly fitted for this task.